Let me first say what I'm doing. I'm special envoy of the World Bank since around a year to work on fragile states. And I'll be very honest with you why I wanted to do this. I had been head of the peacekeeping forces in Ivory Coast and in Mali. This has become almost a cliche. We all realized at the time, and we do it already for 10 years, that if you want to work about peacemaking, to reduce fragility, you always have to work together, the development people, the diplomats, and the people who work in peacekeeping and in the military. This so-called 3D approach of diplomacy, development, and defense has been around for many years. But my frustration, having worked in Mali, which is, of course, again, a specific case, but you find similarities in other cases, is that this combination never worked or materialized for many, many reasons that would take too much to go into. But I still think it is the way to go. If you look at the Sahel at the moment, my frustration was not only about the level of the interest of people to commit good peacekeeping troops, not only the poor countries with badly trained groups, but also the return of Europeans and others to peacekeeping, that I found that very important. There's a lot of criticism about UN peacekeeping. Some is correct, some is not correct. But in any case, you need to be investing, first of all, in troops that go out, that protect people, and not seen as sitting in their own offices and not doing a whole lot of stuff. You need, therefore, first of all, that peacekeeping again becomes relevant. Don't forget, at the moment, about 10% of the areas where we find major suffering right now in the world are, that's where peacekeeping operations are present. They are not, for the reasons we know, in Idlib or in all kind of areas where we know that there are major issues right now, including, by the way, in some parts of the Sahel. So that's point number one. The second is, I have seen the last couple of years that the military aspect has become overemphasized over both the diplomatic and the development side. Also, that is not new to many of the listeners, I'm sure, but it's nitty-gritty work. Who has the ownership? Are the governments your ally, or do they make the problem larger? This is a major issue. My sense is that the working with local communities, especially in peacemaking, and in that context, protecting local communities by, if it's necessary, only military force, that combination is still not there. And I think it is crucial that international organizations together, obviously, especially with local communities and NGOs, work on this. The same goes for the development side. And it is my goal in the World Bank. By the way, we have a new fragile state strategy. The World Bank has become maybe now the biggest player in this. They have a capital increase, which is gigantic. We have to do more about fragile states because we know that in 2030, if we want to reach the Sustainable Development Goals, that will, we know that the poverty will be to 50 to 70% in those areas. So to answer more specific to a very complex question you are raising is, yes, I think again, people should be very much again looking at a good link between those three nexus. And I think, strangely enough, the diplomatic side has to be reinforced. If I'm working in Mali and they send a special representative of the United Nations, but nobody takes care of, what are the risks in the neighboring countries in supporting all kind of military weaponry and so on, or the diplomatic support to make peace, it's not going to work. And you see in the last couple of years that especially the defense departments, and I have nothing against defense departments because we needed very good troops, but have lost out to the diplomats in the world, both locally, especially locally, but also internationally. So again, there, I think that has to be reinforced. And I think the European Union can and should play a major role in this. And this is a major challenge because I see everywhere now with COVID and the enormous consequences also in Europe, especially now. I mean, I feel very much for the Italians and the solidarity we need in Europe. I'm saying that also as a Dutch citizen. I mean, my government at the time, we would this policy has to be one of solidarity. But even that is difficult in Europe. So we're becoming more inward looking, and that is very risky because we know that the weakest link, even if you don't talk about morality or development or the future 10 years, the weakest link in an international pandemic is always the most vulnerable, far away. It's a self-enlightened interest of people to work in fragile areas, but with humility. I think that's very crucial. With humility about what's going on, who the local players are, not putting your instruments and then apply them to any situation in the world. If we do that the same in the World Bank with a fragile state strategy, it's much more now about the historical trajectories, the local players, how you can catalyze funds to be able to make sure that the vulnerabilities of people are decreasing. That agenda is still there. And I think fora like this can really contribute to helping the nexus between those three elements. And all realize, I think, especially when you talk about now the key area of humanitarian and development in the Sahel for the next 10 years, that will be absolutely a key one. And we need the big players who can create work, who can look at the relations in the climate conflict nexus. I know that you have spoken about that this morning, but it's not only scarcity which leads to this issue of conflict, which you obviously see because of the vulnerability of climate change in the Sahel, but you see it also in policies that we have supported in the European Union, more agricultural, to put it simple, than think about pastoralism. Yeah, we know now this leads to enormously, or co-leads to enormous ethnic differences and risks. So again, there, if our development people, the long-term development people, are not looking at this and have results-oriented policies in terms of jobs and in terms of medium-term reduction of risk for people, I think we will see some of the conflicts that we see expanding in Burkina and in Niger these days, even larger than now. And it means for the Europeans, my final word on this is look to Africa not only as a risk of refugees and terrorism, but as an opportunity and a necessity to create partnership. And for the Bologna Center, it's interesting. It's not just a development partnership or a humanitarian partnership. It is also a political partnership of give and take.